Let me bring you into this. You know, you helped create media as we know it today, and now you're watching its disruption. Do you see anything, as we sort of reconsider who we are, what we do, and who our audience is, and how we get paid, do you see any opportunity here to correct the wrongs, or to build a new path that sort of supports the values that you created in the old one?
That's a large and complex question, but one of the things I always think about is not so much the means of transmission, but the consequences and the effect on the audience. What is the nature of the change of media in terms of what the audience gets? I guess one of the combination of words that most terrifies me is targeted consumers. Poor darlings. We are all in this sort of business of communicating ideas to an audience, making those ideas sufficiently attractive so that the audience basically is enchanted by them. But infrequently ask ourselves the question of what the consequences of those pieces of information. We were talking a little bit about the fact that in the old days, when we saw New York Magazine, at any rate, we would not permit a salesperson to enter the editorial part of the building. There was such a distinct sense of the inviolate relationship between advertising and journalism that they literally could not enter the door. I suspect that is no longer the case. I remember there was a big issue with Chrysler Corporation, who, it was discovered, would read the contents of magazines, and they had made this arrangement with 100 magazines, would read the contents before the issue came out, and then decide whether they were going to advertise on that issue. It's an astonishing fact at the time, and nobody knew about it. And then there was a guy at the Wall Street Journal did a piece on it, and I got a number of people to resign from the Chrysler Design Awards, and Chrysler, after a couple of months, said we are abandoning that policy. But the fact that 100 magazines were willing to join into this participation was astonishing to us. I'm so curious about what the effect of drug company advertising is on the coverage of the current issue about health care. When you're watching television, you realize that it seems like a third of the advertising is for pharmaceuticals. I cannot imagine that a network would be immune to the idea that if they run too much material that supports the president, the drug companies would not be happy with that. This relationship, at least, it seems to me to be somewhat uninvestigated, and partially because it is so inferential that if you are running a company, you're concerned about the economics of the company and who isn't, and you suspect that covering on something as unpopular to drug companies would affect their affection for you, you might not be so vigorous about doing even-handed journalism. At any rate, what I'm saying is that what strikes me as being most significant is not so much the emergence of new platforms, new media, and new technology, as much as how does it affect the nature of the message itself that people are receiving, and what are the consequences? Are these targeted consumers really benefiting in the deepest way from the content?
Well, you could argue that the silver lining in this particular cloud, and as we realize the limits of advertising's ability to support what we do, and we search for alternative revenue streams, close to what Martha is talking about, that we get paid by our actual customers, by the readers directly. They pay for what they value, which in some sense aligns our interest with theirs and avoids the very conflicts you're talking about. Reed, I need you to be my proxy for the sort of people who haven't grown up under the same assumptions of media that we have. When Milton talks about how outrageous it is that Chrysler would read the content and decide whether they want to advertise against it before they put their money down, does that strike you as shocking?
Well, there's two hats. I mean, I do share an interest in the preservation of a civic newsroom for a democracy and how we how we objectively get information to make decisions for the body politic, and that concerns me a lot. And so issues of truth, of information around that and how do we create a robust ecosystem is actually something that bothers me personally. I put some time and energy into it. In terms of the general commercial realm, much less. One thing that's interesting in terms of when you have distributed social media is you actually have two patterns. One is it's harder for it to be corrupted because buying out millions of people is harder. And so that's the positive part of the news. The negative part of the news is you sometimes get, it's either the wisdom of the crowds or the madness of the masses. And sometimes you get the madness of the masses and you get this kind of triviality, spiking through the roof. But you also get some wisdom of the crowd. So for me, when I look at kind of, the kind of church and state of editorial and advertising, I think the real question comes down to where are the points where there's always influence? Where are the points where you need the influence to keep to the objectivity? And for me, it mostly gets to voting and democracy, possibly truth in advertising. You have a legal system for that, that sort of thing. It's not, I think we need a new pattern for it.
But do you think it would be outrageous for Chrysler to read the content before deciding whether to advertise against it?
No.